In this lesson, we will be working on styling a button, and then we will also learn the expanded widget. But first, let's talk about this expanded widget, and we will come back to this button later. Alright, so let's have a look at this expanded widget or expanded class in the API documentation of Flutter. So it says that a widget that expands the child of a row, column or flex. So what does this mean and how it expands the contents of row, column or flex? So let's have a look. So as we know, this expanded widget work inside of a row or a column. Let's create a row. Alright. So for now, let's comment this text. Now if you want to comment a certain thing or a single line in VS Code, then you can keep your cursor at the front and press Ctrl and /. You do not have to even select this text. Alright. So let's create a row over here. So row, and row will have multiple children. So now let's create 3 containers inside of this row. Alright. So container. And now if you only want to color the container and you do not want to use border radius or such, then you are free to use the color argument. Alright. So for just the color, let's use color and not the decoration. Alright. So let's provide red color to this container. So colors.red, and this container will have a child of text widget. So let's name it as 1 so that we can see that this is the first container. Now let's copy this container and then create 2 instances of it so that we have 3 containers inside of row. Now rename this to 2 and this to 3. And we'll be using green background in the second container and the blue background in the third container. Alright. So let's save this code. And here you can see that we have a row, and inside of this row we have 3 containers. Now let's provide some spacing between them. Let's use the space between. So main axis alignment equals to main axis alignment dot space between. Alright. So here you can see that row is occupying the full width in our screen, but the content that are inside of this row are only occupying a fixed space, meaning that they are only occupying the width of the text widget. Alright. So if you want to provide the full width, or if you want this to occupy full width, you should provide the double dot infinity in the container. So let's provide this width and then let it be double dot infinity. Alright. So if I save my code, you can see that my app has a problem and my debugging process has also been paused. And this is because when you use this double dot infinity in container, then this container is trying to occupy infinite space in our screen. But the child of a row can only occupy the space that the rows allowed it to occupy. In this case, this one should only occupy the space up to this 2 widget, right? So we need to provide some constraints to the container so that it only flows up to which the rows allows. So for providing the constraint, you can use the expanded widget. So keep your cursor at the container and then wrap this with an widget, and that widget is the expanded widget. So let's save our code, and we cannot see the changes over here because when our app crashes, then we need to perform this hot restart multiple times so that our debugger will work fine. Alright, so let's try again. So here you can see the first container is expanded so that it can take up all the space that is available to this container. Alright. So let's do the same for all of these remaining containers as well. So let's wrap the second and third container with the expanded widget. Alright. So here you can see that all of these containers are taking equal space that is allowed to them by this row. And here you can see that we have not used this double dot infinity inside of this second and third container, but still you can see that this second and third container is taking up all the space that is available to it. And this is because whenever this container or child is wrapped with this expanded widget, the child expands to the available space that is available to them. Alright. And in this case, we do not need this width equals to double dot infinity over here, because whenever this container or any widget is placed inside of this expanded widget, it automatically takes all the space available. Alright. So the reason for me using this double dot infinity as a width is to show you that whenever you use this option, double dot infinity, make sure that you are wrapping this container with some kind of a restriction, like providing some constraint using this expanded widget. Alright. But in this case, we do not need it. So let's remove it and let's save our code. Now inside of this expanded widget, we can also use the flex option to have a more control over the layout. So here you can see that the children of this row is taking up equal space that is available to them. We can also say that there are 3 parts in this row. First part is occupied by the first widget, second by the second widget, and third by this third container widget, right? So inside of this expanded widget, we have an argument called flex that defines how flexible a content inside of this row or a column can be. So in our case, it is taking up equal space, so the default value will always be 1. So all of this expanded widget has the flex value of 1. If I save this, you can see no change in this output, because using this flex 1 inside of this child in each component means that each component will take up the equal space. So if you add the number of this flex, then the total number is 3, right? So this row is comprised of 3 parts, and each part will take 1/3 of the row. So if I want to provide 50% width to this first container, and I want the second and third container to have 25% each, then I want to change this flex to 2, meaning that now this row is comprised of 4 parts, 2, 3, 4, and it is taking off 50% as it is taking flex 2. Now if I save this code, you can see that this first container is taking 50% and the other containers are taking 25% each. So now if I want this third container and first container to take up equal space, then I can change this third container flex value to 2. And now you can see that whole row is comprised of 2, 3, 4, 5 part, and this is taking the 2/5 part, it is taking the 2/5 part, and this is taking the 1/5 part. So you can get this layout. Alright, so if you change this flex to 0, it means that the widget will not be expanded and it will only take the space that is required for the child component. Alright, so if you look at this completed version, then it is using flex in the column. So there are 2 parts of this column, or 2 child in this column. The first part is the bank balance part and second part is the button part, right? So the first part is taking around 90% and the second part is taking around 10%. So let's try replicating this in our app. So let's remove this row widget for now and let's uncomment this balance part. So you can see the balance part over here, and this balance part has 2 widgets. So let's create a column. So let's wrap this with column, control dot, and then wrap it with a column. Alright, so we have the first part that says bank balance, and then there is a second part that shows the actual balance of the user. Alright, so let it be 0 for now. Let's save it. So now let's wrap this column with an expanded widget. So control dot and then wrap it with widget. Let's rename it to expanded widget, so we can provide 90% over here. And also let's wrap this with an expanded widget, so it only takes up 10%. Alright, so now let's split up our column into 10 equal parts, and the first expanded will take 9 parts. So the second component will only take 10%, meaning flex 1. Alright, so all of this column is divided into 100%. The first expanded is taking 90% and second is taking the 10%. Alright, so now let's bring this bank balance to the center. So let's provide main axis alignment equals to main axis alignment dot center, so that it is at the center of the screen or center of this 90%. So now let's provide some spacing in this bank balance and the actual balance. So we'll be using sized box for it. So sized box and the height of 20 pixel. Alright, so let's save this. And now let's work on styling our button. Alright, for styling the button, for providing background color and such, we will be using the style argument. So inside of it, the style argument, and this style argument accepts a button style, and we are using this elevated button, so we will be using elevated button and then dot style from. Alright, if you are using text button, then you should be writing text button dot style from. So you can select all of this argument from here. If you want to provide the background color, then use this background color, and in the original design it was red, so colors.red, and this will provide a beautiful red color over here. Alright, so in the original design this button has full width, so let's work on that. So we can achieve this by providing minimum size to the button, and it expects the size component. So size, and this expects width and height. Now if you want this button to take only the height and width of the widget inside of it, then you can keep it at 0, 0. 0 will be the default height or default width for the button. So the first element is the width and second is the height. So the width will be double dot infinity, meaning it will take all the space that is available, and we can use it because it is wrapped with the expanded widget. And here we have a full width of the button as per the original design. So now let's change this button text to add money. And let's change this intensity to 700, so it adheres to the design. Alright, so in the original design we had a border radius in this button, so let me bring up the original design. So in this app you can see that there is a border radius over here, And if you look at the overall UI, it is quite beautiful than ours, right? And this is because this app is using latest version of Material Design. So let's navigate into our Material app, and inside of this theme data.dark, and inside of it you will be using this use Material 3. It is a latest version of Material Design. If we set it to true, then our widgets will become more adaptive, more expressive, and the overall experience of our app will be greater, right? So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we will be working with states in Flutter. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we will learn stateful widgets and states in Flutter. Now before we start, there is one thing to keep in mind. In Flutter, it is recommended that we surround this string with a single quote instead of double quote. So let's change this to single quote, and let me change all of these double quotes to single quotes all over this file. And from now on, we'll only be using single quotes. So now let's get started by understanding what states are in Flutter. A simple explanation of a state is that states are the information that can be changed. Right? So any information that can be changed is called the state. Now in previous lesson I mentioned that there are two types of special widgets, the stateless widget and stateful widget, right? So till now we are using this stateless widget because any information that is inside of this app do not change. It does not have any state. So it's called the stateless widget, alright? So anything that you see inside of this stateless widget does not change. We cannot dynamically change the bank balance. We cannot change any components once this build function is triggered. When this build function is triggered in this stateless widget, the component that you see over here or the widget that you see over here are permanently printed over here, and it cannot change in our runtime. But in our app, we need a functionality where we click the button, $500 needs to be added and this bank balance needs to be changed, right? So there is a information that needs to be changed, this bank balance. So we need a state, and this is where the stateful widget comes into play. So while building your app in Flutter, if you want to change data of a widget dynamically, then you need the stateful widget. So let's go ahead and learn how we can create a stateful widget. So let's create a new file over here, naming this dummy.dart to test our code. So for creating a stateless widget, we would type STLESS, and Flutter will recommend this stateless widget. We can click at this and a stateless widget will be created for us, right? So for creating the stateful widget, type STFUL and click at this Flutter stateful widget. This will create a stateful widget for us. So now let's create another stateless widget, and let's find the difference between stateless and stateful. Now in this stateless widget, you can see that there is a single class with the build function inside of it, right? But if you look at this stateful widget, it has two classes which has been merged so that we get the capability of dynamically changing the state inside of it. A build method inside of this stateless widget will only be triggered once. So anything that we return from this build method, any widget we return and that is printed in our screen, it cannot be changed dynamically. But in stateful widget, this build method will be triggered every time there is a change in state. So when we make a change, this build method will rebuild the components and we can see the reflected changes. And we need this capability because every time a user clicks at this button, $500 need to be added and this needs to be updated, right? So now we will change our stateless widget to stateful widget. So let's delete this dummy.dart as we do not need it. And in this main.dart, currently we are extending stateless widget. Let's change it to stateful widget. So keep your cursor over here, control dot, and then convert to stateful widget. This will automatically convert our stateless widget to stateful widget. Alright. So changing this stateless widget to stateful widget is a major change in our app. So we need to hard restart our app. So let's stop debugging and then start debugging again. So now let's work on the functionality. So currently in this bank balance, we are hard coding this 0. Instead of doing this, we will be creating a new variable and then we will be passing that variable in our text widget. So as the bank balance is often in decimal, I'll be using this double. So we have a decimal point and my variable name will be the balance. And let the initial balance be 500. Alright. So let's copy this and paste it over here. And we'll be starting the dynamic strings with dollar. So dollar and then the balance. So let's save this. And here you can see that we have a $500 in our bank balance. Congratulations. So now whenever user clicks this add money button, we need to add $500 to the existing balance. So now let's rename the function first from this function to add money function. And now let's copy this function name and paste it in this onPressed as well. Alright. Now instead of printing this button is pressed, we will be adding $500 to the existing balance, right? We have this variable balance, so balance equals to balance plus 500. Alright. Now let's print a statement in our debug console so that we can see the changes of the balance. Let's save our changes. And now let's monitor this debug console. Alright. So every time I press this button, 500 will be added to the balance. So if I click it, I can see the increment. So the balance is increasing and the variable is changing, but we cannot see the updated changes in our widget, right? And this is because we are only updating the variable. Now for this stateful widget to rebuild all the component inside of it, we need to notify Flutter that the UI components need to be updated using the set state functionality, right? So let's use set state, and inside of this set state we'll have the anonymous function. So inside of this function body, whatever variable you change, this will be monitored by Flutter as a state change, and when state is changed, our build component is re-triggered and then we can see the updated UI. Alright. So now let's change this initial balance to 0 and let's hot restart our app. And here you can see we have 0 as our initial balance. So there is one issue with our app. So currently I have 0 balance. If I click this button, then $500 will be added each time in my bank balance. But if I click at this hot restart, then you can see that my balance that I have just earned by clicking the button will be reset to 0. And this is kind of a problem because each time we restart our app in our physical device, our balance will reset to 0. So how can you be a billionaire if each time you restart your phone, your bank balance becomes 0, right? So for this, we will be using the shared preferences to save data locally into our device so that the data is preserved on each restart. So in the next lesson, we will have a look at the shared preferences for saving our data locally in Flutter. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we will be working on shared preferences for saving our data locally so that we do not lose any data between the app restarts. Alright. And in the meantime, we'll also learn about the packages and how we can use external packages in our Flutter project. So now I want you to navigate into a website that we will be using very often in our Flutter development process. Alright. And the website is pop.dev. Now this website is an official package repository for Dart and Flutter apps. It is a home for open source packages that we can use in our Flutter app. So let's get started by understanding what packages are exactly. So let's take an example of this custom bike to understand packages better. So if I give you an assignment of creating this custom bike, then how would you do it? Would you start creating this wheel or this engine from the start? No. You'd probably source these materials, like you'll get a wheel from somewhere and then engine from somewhere, and then you'll assemble your bike to create a custom bike, right? So this engine, this wheel are like packages in Flutter. They are ready-made tools that can be attached into our project, so we do not have to reinvent the wheel or do something that is already done. We can simply source the item that is already created and we can assemble this for creating our own custom bike. So packages in Flutter are like a ready-made tool that can make our app development process smoother. They are the collection of Dart code, resources and configuration file that provide specific functionalities or feature. So the shared preferences that we are trying to use in our project for saving the data locally is a package in Flutter. The shared preferences is a set of Dart code and resources that is created by someone so that we developers can benefit from it. So we do not have to write the logic of saving the data in our local storage from the scratch, right? We can use the package and leverage the functionality of shared preferences to save data locally. So let's go ahead and search for shared preferences over here. So shared_preferences. So here you can see this package. So let's click at it and see how this package can be installed in our Flutter app. So navigate into this installing tab, and here you can see the command that can be used for installing the shared preferences into our Flutter app. So let's copy this command. Let's head into the project in VS Code. Open up this terminal and paste the command that we just copied. Click enter and then this package will be added to our Flutter project. So let's navigate into this popsec.yml. So this popsec.yml file consists of all the dependencies that our project uses. So let's scroll a little bit and here you can see that we are using shared preferences in our Flutter project. Alright, so let's head towards the documentation of the shared preferences. So now let's move on to this readme tab so that we can see how this plugin or this package can be used. So if you scroll a little bit, you can see that there is a code for writing the data and there is a code for reading the data. Now there is one thing that you need to keep in mind while working with packages. So currently I am using this 2.2.2 version, right? So whenever you are installing these shared preferences on your Flutter project, this version might change. So when there is a change in the version, the code that you use to call the function inside of this package might also change. In most of the cases it does not change, but in some cases it might change. So by the time you install the shared preferences on your project, the method of calling this write function or this read function might change. So whenever I instruct you to install a new package or use a package, then you should see this readme tab and see the updated code. Alright, and use the updated code. So here we have the code for writing the data. So let's copy this. So while working with packages in Flutter, there's one thing that you need to understand is that whenever we install a new package, our popsec.yml file gets updated. And so this is a major change in our project. So for our app to run smoothly, we need to hard restart our project. Alright, so stop debugging and start debugging again. So now let's use the code for writing the data, and we need to use that code in this add money function, because when this function is triggered, our balance gets updated and we need to save this updated balance in local storage, right? So let's paste our code over here, and now let's import this shared preferences, control dot, and import the package. Alright, so here we are only trying to save this balance which is of data type double, right? So let's remove all of this example code and let's only keep this set double. So let's remove this and this as well. Alright, so here you can see that we have this await expression over here, and we have not learned about async and await in Dart. So at the later part of this course, when we are working with API, we have an entire lesson that is dedicated to this async and await. So I'll not be explaining what this means in detail, but as we are using this in our code, I'll provide a simple explanation. So by using this await expression, we are instructing Dart that this part of code might take some time for the execution. Alright, and without executing this code, Dart cannot move forward with other code. So by using this await expression, we are basically instructing Dart to wait for the execution for this part of code. And without executing this, Dart cannot move forward with other code that are below this line. So this is a very simple explanation of async and await. There's more to it and we'll be covering that later. Alright. So only thing that we need to understand now is that this await statement or this await expression waits for the code to execute before moving forward with other code. Alright, and whenever we use this await statement or await expression inside a function, this function need to be of async type. So type async after this parenthesis. Alright, and again we will be coming back to this async and await later. So in our code we are getting the instance of the shared preferences and we are waiting till the instance is created. So the shared preferences instance is created and it is saved in this prefs variable. Alright, and we will be using this variable to set a value in our shared preferences. So whenever you use this set double, set integer or set string, the first parameter is the key for saving the value and the second parameter is the actual value. So our actual value that we will be saving is the balance, this balance over here, the updated balance, and the key will be the balance. So we are saving the updated balance in this balance key. Alright, and now let's save our code. And now every time a user presses this button, the balance will be updated and this updated balance will be set in our shared preferences or in our local storage as this balance key. Alright, so now we need to find a way to load this balance when our app restarts. So let's create a new function, void load balance. And now inside of this load balance, we need to read the value that is saved inside of this balance. So let's copy this code and paste it over here. And as we are using this await statement, our function need to be of async type. So type async. And here instead of setting the value of balance, we will be reading the value. So instead of set double, we will be using get double. And this get double will only expect a key. So let's remove this second parameter. And while getting the value, we do not need this await expression. So let's remove it. So this will get the value that is stored in our balance key. So we will be assigning our variable or this double for this value. Alright, so balance equals to preps.get double and then balance. And here you can see that I have got an error. This error has occurred because when user installs our app for the first time, we will have no value saved in this balance key, right? So this will return null, and we are trying to return the value that is obtained by this preps.get double to our balance, which is of data type double, and null can't be assigned to double, so we have this error. So for solving this, we need to provide a fallback value, and in Dart you can use this double question mark to provide a fallback value. So now if our code is able to find the value in this balance, then the balance value will be assigned to this balance variable. But if it cannot find the value or this returns null, then our code will fall back to this alternate value. So in Dart you can use this double question mark for providing the alternate value or for providing the fallback value. Alright, this double question mark is called the null aware operator in Dart. This null aware operator assures that we do not accidentally pass null value where the data type is defined. Alright, and here we are only updating this balance variable, but we are not doing anything in our state. So let's move this inside of a set state. So set state, and inside of this function body we will be passing this so that our UI is also aware of this balance changes. So let's save our code. Now we need to find a way to trigger this or call this function. So for now let's create a new button in this column. So here in this column let's create an outline button for now. So outline button, and this outline button has this two argument, required argument. On pressed we will be passing this load balance argument, load balance function over here, and in this child we will have a text widget. Alright, and text widget will have this load balance text over it. So whenever we make a moderate change in our app, like we introduce new widgets to the UI or create new functions, we need to use this hot restart. Only using this hot reload will not work then. So let's save our code and then perform hot restart. So now if I click at this load balance, you can see that the balance is not increasing, and this is because we have not clicked the add money button and our balance key has not saved any value. So it is falling back to this 0 value. So now let's click this add money for a couple of times, and now we have a balance of 3,500. So now let's restart our app so that balance is reset to 0. So let's click at hot restart. So here you can see it is reset to 0. Now if I click at this load balance, then you can see our previous value is available at this bank balance. So we were able to use the set preferences for setting the value, and we were able to load this balance using this load balance button. Alright, but in our original design there was no button called load balance, and the balance was automatically loaded when our app restarted. So how can this be done? So at the next lesson we will be learning about init state in stateful widget. So I'll see you at the next lesson. So we have worked on the functionality of our billionaire app, but in our original design there was no button called load balance. The balance was loaded automatically when the app was restarted, right? So in this lesson we will be learning how this can be done using init state. So now let's create a new file and understand what init state is. So new file, and we'll be naming it to dummy.dart. And inside of this Dart file, let's create a stateful widget. So stf, and then stateful widget will be created. So when this stateful widget was created, you can see that we have this build method inside of it. This build method is responsible for rendering components into our UI. So any widget that we return from here gets rendered in our UI. And in this stateful widget, when a state is changed, this build method will be triggered again, and then updated UI will be rendered into our screen. Now similar to this build method, we have another inbuilt method in stateful widget called init state. So type init and Flutter will suggest this init state. So let's have a look at what this init state means. So now let's try to find the difference between this init state method and this build method. So this build method is triggered every time there is a change in state, meaning that every time there is a change in state, this build method will get triggered and it will update the components in our UI. In the other end, this init state is triggered only once when our widget is placed in the UI. It only runs for the first time when a stateful widget is introduced in our UI. Changes in the state does not impact this init state method. So seems like this init state is the perfect place to call this load balance function, right? So now let's delete this dummy.dart. We do not need it now. And let's move to this main.dart and create a init state. So type init, and Flutter will suggest this init state. And now let's place this load balance inside of this init state. Let's remove this comment and copy this load balance function and paste it over here. Alright. Now let's remove this load balance button from our UI. Let's save our code, and this load balance has been removed. Alright. So let's increase our balance a little bit. It's 9,000 now. Let's hot restart our app. So here you can see that even after hot restart, this balance is still preserved in our app. So now let's hard restart our app to see if the data is still persistent in our app. So stop debugging and start debugging again. So even after hard restart, this balance is still being preserved in our app. Now in the next lesson, we'll be working on refactoring our app, and we'll also learn about child to parent communication. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we'll be working on refactoring our code or splitting our code into multiple files. Alright. So let's get on with it. Now the first thing that we want to split is the button. So let's head into this lib folder and create a new file. Now I'll be naming this file as addMoneyButton.dart. So in this button, there is nothing that can be changed in the runtime. So let's create a stateless widget over here. So now let's rename this class. So Control D and then addMoneyButton. Alright. So now let's bring the button code from main.dart to this file. So let's copy this widget and paste it in our new file. So instead of returning this placeholder, we'll be returning the expanded widget. Alright. So we need to import this expanded widget. So import it from material.dart. So in this file, we do not have this addMoney function. So let's replace this addMoney with an anonymous function. Alright. So let's leave it for now, and we'll be coming back to this later. So now we need to use this class in main.dart. So let's move into this main.dart file, and instead of this expanded widget, we'll be passing our custom widget. Alright. So now we need to import this file. So control dot and import. So if you look into this emulator, there is no change in our UI because we are just splitting our file and doing nothing with the UI. But if I click at this addMoney button, then nothing is happening. And this is because in our addMoneyButton.dart, you can see that we only have this anonymous function without any function logic. But here you can see that the addMoney function is inside of this main.dart file. So we need to find a way in which this button, when pressed, should be able to trigger the function of this main.dart file. So when a button is clicked on this widget should be able to communicate with this main.dart file to execute this function. So the solution that we are looking for can be achieved through child to parent communication. This addMoney button is a child of this main.dart file. So we need to find a way in which a child can communicate with the parent. So for this, we need to pass the function from this parent component to the child component. So let's see how this can be done. So let's move into this child component now. So as the parent component will be passing the function to the child component, we need to get that function in our constructor. So let's create a function property first. So as the addMoney function in main.dart is void, we will be writing void function parenthesis and the function name. So let the function name be addMoney function. So now let's use this property in our constructor. So comma and then required this dot addMoney function. Alright. So as this addMoney function will be passed from this parent file, we don't need this constant keyword over here. So let's remove it. And now let's pass this addMoney function into this onPressed. So now the only thing remaining is to pass the function from this parent to the child. So let's move to the child component, control space, and here you can see the addMoney function, and in this we will be passing the addMoney function of our main.dart file. So in this way we are passing a function from this parent to child, and whenever this button is pressed, our child component will execute the function of the parent. So in this way a child component can communicate with the parent. So what's happening here is actually very simple. This parent component is sending this function over to this child component, and this child component is just executing the function that is being passed by the parent. So in this lesson we learned about how the child can communicate with the parent by using this callback function. Now in the next lesson we will be working on sending data from this parent to the child. So I'll see you at the next lesson.